Well, sometime last year I posted a video regarding the problem I had with this 2002 F-150 with the 5.4 engine. It has trouble starting up on a warm start. So if I've driven it a certain distance, it gets up to full operating temperature, then I'll go into a store, or I just finished hiking, for example, I'll come back to the vehicle and it will not start easily. And I had pretty much nailed this down to the check valve in the fuel pump, which is leaking fuel out of the system, and the system has to repressurize. So one of the solutions is turning the key a few times to the on position and repriming the entire fuel system, or just holding the key in the start position until the vehicle finally gets enough fuel to start. Now I'm going to demonstrate once again, hopefully, what's going on. And in this video, I'm finally going to change the fuel pump and show how I fix this. So it took 2 turns of the key, but it finally started. I hadn't been out here that long, so that's probably why it was a little easier to start than normal. But now let's get into the fuel pump replacement. So while I'm driving home for the last time with this fuel pump, I thought I'd tell you a little bit of my plan. So if you watch my channel enough, you know I'm always modifying and improving, and I'm getting the itch now to put a Supercharger kit on this. I haven't decided on which kit yet, but to do that I need a lot more fuel flow. And the nice thing with doing a fuel pump replacement is that I can use the Lightning or Harley-Davidson F-150 fuel pump, which has the fuel capacity that I need for a Supercharger. So I went ahead to, I got it from Late Model Restoration, and of course they didn't give it to me. I paid full price for it, or actually I waited till discounts. I always wait for discounts. I've got the Lightning fuel pump to go on this, and it should be a direct bolt-on, bolt-in without any real modifications, including tune, because I have a return style fuel system, the old style, and the fuel pressure regulator should send any unneeded fuel back to the fuel tank. So this is going to be a real nice upgrade. I'm never going to starve for fuel, and if I do decide to put that Supercharger, and I think I am kind of trending toward Procharger, it's going to give me all the fuel capacity I need to do this, and Abe agrees completely. Heads up, make sure you stay tuned to the end, where I'll show a learning I went through that will prevent you from going through the same issue. Here's a quick demonstration of the fuel pressure drop using a pressure gauge I'll link in the description of this video. You'll also find the link to my video showing how I determined the cause of the difficult hot engine startup. Removal is straightforward, but not necessarily easy. These 2 straps have got to come out. There's bolts on the other side of the tank, 1 each, that hold these straps in, and then they'll twist out of their slots. And you have a multitude of connections up there. You can see the fill lines that are going into the tank, and there's a vent line up there. So we're going to get started with putting a jack stand under here with a softener to make sure we don't damage the tank, and then a couple jack stands to keep it level and start to drop it. And the biggest recommendation is get the fuel level as low as possible before you start this project. Alright, I've got the ground cable disconnected just to make sure there's no mishaps with fuel. I've got 2 jack stands, 1 on each end, and I've got a hydraulic jack that's already putting a little bit of pressure on there. If you do this project, make sure you inspect your straps. I believe there were recalls for those that live in the Rust Belt areas where there's a lot of salt on the roads. These things can rust out and your fuel tank can drop out of the vehicle dangerously. Mine are in pretty good shape. I just think I'll touch them up with some Rust-Oleum. This one's a little worse than the other. It's got some pretty good pitting there, but I think it's still pretty substantial. I've started lowering the tank, and now before I get any tension on anything, I've pulled this wiring harness which goes to the fuel pump away from the frame, and I'm going to disconnect that wiring harness, and then I'll get the fuel tank a little lower so I can reach up there and disconnect these fuel lines. Here you can see how crowded it is above the tank, between the tank and the bottom of the bed, and I just decided not to try to remove those fuel lines there. It's just too difficult, so I disconnected them, a much easier process at the frame. Finally got the gas tank out. Unfortunately, had to rip apart some of these connections, which means I probably need to, I will replace those hoses with fuel line hose, including this one. It just looks pretty rotten. And now that I've disturbed it, it's going to be a lot worse. I also found that it was easier to disconnect the fuel pump at the rail along the frame than it was to actually take it off the pump, because I couldn't see what I was doing over here. So this made it a heck of a lot easier, just pushing these clips out, which allowed it to release. So now, after I've cleaned off the top of this thoroughly, and I'm a little concerned about some of this rust here. I'm probably going to do a little bit of Rust-Oleum on that, just to seal it. Actually, I'll use some rust converter on it first. So that's something I hopefully don't have to worry about, and then we'll move on. Now, a big problem I've got is that the connection for the stock F150 fuel pump is different from the Lightning. The Lightning's got the same number of wires going to the pump, but it's got a multi-prong connector, which I do not understand. Anyway, I'm gonna have to take this connector off and splice it into the one on the Lightning pump, and that should do me some good, since the wires and the gauges all are consistent between this pump and the pump coming from the Lightning. All right, so I've got the two fuel pumps next to each other. The new one with the dual pumps for a Lightning application, and the old one. Look at that filthy sock. Nice brand new socks on these pumps. So this is gonna be a much cleaner installation now after 240,000 miles of use. Now, I mentioned that I had to swap the electrical connectors. This one had a 4-prong connector. This one had 8-prong. You can see here the 8-prong that came off this, only 6 were being used in the Lightning application. And here I put the 4-prong on it, and I did that based on tracing the wires through these lugs, and this is what I've got. The old has the yellow, red, black, red with black, and the new one has red, blue, black, and gray. And these are the color of the wires coming out of the top. They change sometimes as they're going into the pump itself. So the first two are for fuel level, and the second two are for fuel pump. If you try to do what I'm doing, please verify this yourself. Don't just blindly use what I'm telling you here. But now it's time for me to put the fuel pump back in the tank. With the tank out, I'm doing some additional inspection, and you can see that all this material on my fingers is coming from these rotten hoses. This is for the EVAP system, so I need to replace all of this hose in order to make sure that I don't get any leaks in the future and don't get any codes or drivability issues. So I'm going to use fuel line hose for this. I'm just going to pick it up at a local parts store. All right, time to go shopping. Now that I've got the fuel pump in and it's ready to be plugged up, I got to replace a lot of the hoses. So here's the EVAP hoses that I was pointing out just now, and with the vent that comes off at the gas fill. And the gas fill line is a disaster. I need to get one of those. I hope I can get one of those locally at the parts store. You can see that I used rust converter on this, so I've converted all this rust into a protective coating with some spray paint. I'll link that below. And now I'm almost ready to put the tank back in. I just got to get those hoses. During reinstallation of the tank, I want to make sure I don't get any particles in the fuel lines, so I put the caps off the fuel pump here after I put the hoses on the fuel pump, and I'll seal those up with a plastic bag during installation of the tank. Got the EVAP line out in one piece, and now all I need to do is cut to size the fresh hose that I've got to make sure that it's completely sealed. And you can see this is just nasty rubbery. It's just not going to last much longer, so this was a good time to get this done. Now that I've got the rust preventive or rust converter on some of the steel here, I've done it in a couple places where the tank covers it up. I've also got the EVAP line with the new hoses, so I don't have to worry about those leaking. It's time to put the gas tank back in. And to make sure I don't have any contaminants inside the tank, I've covered all the lines with plastic and rubber bands to make sure everything's in there. And all this is new hose to make sure that everything is secure, except for this fuel line hose here, which is pretty robust. It's still in good condition, so I didn't replace that. Okay, the real test involves having to start this vehicle after it's been sitting warm for about 20, 30, 40 minutes. Let's see if it starts up. Perfection. Okay, so I've actually driven the vehicle a few times, and I just wanted to give you an update. The slow start or difficult start on warm conditions is completely resolved, so that confirms that I had a problem with the check valve, and so I'm happy about that. The fuel pressure is up, so I'm up at idle 5 psi, so I went from 30 psi at idle to 35, and the fuel pressure is being held at the fuel rail, so again, it's another indication that the check valve is resolved. And Another thing that I've noticed is that the drivability, the vehicle just seems to be happier with the extra fuel. Now I do need to get the fuel delivery adjusted by the tuners, because I am getting some negative fuel trims. It's pulling fuel, so the fuel pressure is probably overwhelming the fuel injectors based on the current tune. So that's going to have to be something I'll work with the tuners to get adjusted, and that's real easy. The biggest problem I've got is that the fuel gauge is now off by what I'm guessing to be about 4 gallons. And what's frustrating is that the fuel pump did not come with instructions, so that's why you're watching my video, I hope. But it didn't give me any instructions to explain what to do to make sure that the float arm is set in the proper location. It needs to be properly bent to make sure that that when it goes to its full rise position, it's not getting there too soon. The variable resistor that's in there. So the only way I can fix this now is to pull the pump and adjust the float arm, which is really frustrating to me. Again, late model restoration did not provide instructions, and that's quite frustrating to me, that any pump company should be sending you instructions to make sure that that float arm is properly set before you put it in the tank. Now the other way to get to the pump is to pull the bed. I'm going to do that this spring because I got some things I want to take care of on the bed and on the frame. So I'll have direct access to the pump that way, but again, it's frustrating that I have to pull all this thing apart again to do some adjustments that, number one, should have been done when they built the pump, and number two, should have been confirmed with instructions when you got the pump to make sure that nothing happened in shipment. So stay tuned. I'm going to show you now how to make sure that that pump float arm is in its proper location before you put it inside the tank. Okay, so how do we make sure that we're getting the right information from the fuel module assembly to the fuel gauge? And that's very simple. Now, it took me some time to find this on the internet. I couldn't find it anywhere else or looking at any of my manuals, but this is an important step. Obviously, mine is off. When you get to empty on your fuel gauge, you should have between 2 and 3 gallons of fuel reserve so you don't run out. Unfortunately, I've got at least 6 gallons of fuel reserve, which means that my pump arm is way off. So what you want to do to confirm the accuracy is to get your pump on its sock, sitting on a flat surface, and it needs to be completely vertical. And what you want to measure is the distance of this float arm, the bottom of the float arm, from the top of the flat surface. It should be 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. If it's not, you need to bend this float arm so that the rheostat gets a full sweep from bottom to top, which takes it about, it looks like 3/4 of an inch from the top flange. So again, make sure that it's flat, it's vertical, 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. So I hope this helps you out. I think it was a really good project, a fun project, but it was dirty and it was not necessarily easy for one person. But as you saw, I did add a double pump, lightning pump, for a future Procharger installation, so hopefully that's going to happen. Stay tuned to my channel. And for you that want to do that, I think that's a good option. Actually, I'm not having any drivability issues with the dual pumps over the single pump. The truck is running just perfectly fine, as I've mentioned before. So if you did like it, give me that thumbs up. Please subscribe. Please hit that notification icon, and I'll see you next time on Driving Intelligence.